Okay, I'm going to call to session the town pension and OPEB, which stands for other post-employee benefit oversight committee meeting. Welcome. So could I have a roll call, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Spector?
Here.
Councilmember Mariko Sayak? Councilmember Steve Leonardis?
Here.
Chair Rob Rennie?
Here.
And Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Okay, so please join me in the pledge. Everybody stand. Oops, I got to turn on my mic first. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so I guess I turn it over to staff at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Oversight Committee members. We have one item on the agenda tonight, and it's actually a fiduciary training. With us tonight is Harvey Lederman of the firm Reed Smith. Harvey and his firm specialize in pension governance and other areas. He's an individual who, in my role at the City of San Jose, I have extensive experience with. As you know, this committee was formed because this body has taken over the oversight of pension assets and OPEB assets through the creation of our 115 Trust. And as such, it is a best practice to receive fiduciary training, and it's also an opportunity for yourselves to ask a industry veteran any questions you might have about 115 Trust, the fiduciary responsibilities of pension assets, or any other questions of that nature. With that, Harvey Lederman.
Thank you, Aaron. Mr. Mayor, members of the council and committee. Actually, I didn't know that there was a committee until a few hours ago. I thought it was council, but and I didn't know there was a pension and OPEB trust. And so actually what I would like to do is the slides and the conversation that I had prepared this evening are really 36,000-foot fiduciary responsibilities of public officials, which is what Arne and I had spoken about originally. But now that I know that you have responsibility over a pension trust and both for pension and OPEB assets, I want to make sure that I give you something of value that might be helpful in terms of your stewardship of those assets. Because that's really very much my bread and butter and has been for my career in terms of advising public employee pension funds and pension trusts. And so what I'll try to do is I'll try to take it out of the general public official fiduciary when I can and focus, if you wish, on being a trustee of other people's money, public investments and pension trusts. So if I don't get that focus me, will you? And let's have some questions about, if you have any questions in mind about that. But let me try to give you. I put some slides together here for you, and since you got them ahead of time, which doesn't always happen. You're probably scratching your head saying, what is this? For example, the first slide, what is a fiduciary? The concept of a fiduciary goes back to Hammurabi, but I decided to come forward a little bit from there. The idea that public officials are fiduciaries for the public really is rather ancient. We don't dress like this anymore, but somebody says that's supposed to look like Plato. And Plato actually had persuaded the Senate to pass an edict that said any public official who accepted a bribe would be put to death. So long time ago the concept of fiduciary came into place. You're probably wondering what that's King John signing the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta actually had some provisions in there sort of along the same line, that justice was not for sale. And so, again, the idea that public officials serve a higher responsibility than their own personal interests. We've got King Louis IX in 1250s, somewhere in there, who actually, by edict, created rules for conflicts of interest for provincial governors and people in local communities like this one. So that goes back, again, almost 1,000 years. And, how could we leave out Alexander Hamilton and the band of merry men who, I'm not going to rap this, Arn, because it was a great show, but I don't think I'll do it in rap. But again, the Declaration of Independence with the idea, it is a fiduciary idea that the power is in the people, and that the government derives its powers from the governed and not the other way around. So that is a fiduciary history. I threw this slide in here because, frankly, I just like the picture. This is a colleague of mine who has a wonderful golden doodle, and this was taken last summer on the beach in Nantucket. And it to me, this is a fiduciary relationship. In fact, that's why dogs are called Fido. Same root word as fiduciary. That's what it comes from. And it's the idea of a relationship of trust and fidelity. In the public official concept, it's one between a public trust for those to whom the public delegates responsibility. Welcome, council member.
Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. I'm Harvey Lederman Reed-Smith, and we're just getting through the picture part of it. Ordinarily, I don't do pictures. I don't do clip art. I just go right into text, but I thought it might be useful to depict some of these things. So the golden doodle, by the way, is not for sale, apparently. So next question is, are you a fiduciary? What makes for a fiduciary relationship? And this isn't just in the public sector. This is any fiduciary trust relationship. You may, on a personal level, you may find yourself being a trustee of a family trust, for example. Same responsibilities. You're the steward of other people's money. It's characterized by a couple of points I put on this slide. Beneficiaries, in this case the public, delegates authority to the fiduciary to act on their behalf. They can't, in the case of a town, there's no way that the citizens of a town could otherwise get anything done, so they delegate responsibility. They confer authority on you to act on their behalf. I'll come back to that in a minute. The fiduciary has discretionary powers. That's a big part of being a fiduciary. That's part of the trust concept, where it's not everything isn't laid out. I mean, there are always trust documents that establish the parameters and the goals of a trust, but there's a lot of gray area in between the black and white on the page, and the trust that is conferred on fiduciaries is to fill in those gray areas, to fill in the blank spaces. You'll never pass, even though our California legislature tries, you'll never pass enough laws to fill in all the blanks, nor would you want to. So you're delegated substantial discretion and responsibility over other people's assets and interests. That's a hallmark of being a fiduciary. Because you're a fiduciary, you're in a superior position to get the kind of information necessary to be a good steward, to be a prudent steward of other people's interests. And that is also part of the fiduciary responsibility. And finally, again with the trust, the people you're acting on behalf of trust that the fiduciary will act in their best interests. And that means that you won't be acting in your own personal best interests, but you'll have the best interests of the public at heart. In the context of something like a pension trust or an OPEB trust, that is used to pay benefits for people, you can see where all of these are essential functions of the relationship between the people you're acting on behalf of. You're acting on behalf of people who are current employees of the city, the town, and who are compensated both in current funds and in future funds. And your responsibility, they'll get their paycheck now, but what they're trusting you to do is to steward the second half of their compensation for the services that they're rendering, and that is the money and the care that they will get in the future when they've retired from service to the town. These are all critical aspects of serving that role of being the steward of those assets that will confer those benefits in the future. As town council members, my guess is that you not only sit on this council, but you participate in dozens of other boards and commissions that you sit on. Let me know if I'm wrong about that, but that seems to come with the territory. So one of the questions you want to ask is, what am I a fiduciary for? Clearly, with the pension funds, the Section 115 trust, you are a fiduciary of those funds, but you're also the steward of all the other public funds that make up your general fund for the town. So there's no question that you are a fiduciary and have fiduciary responsibilities over that. Again, the relationship is different from a contractual relationship. And maybe that's the hallmark of this, that's the key, is to recognize that if your relationship with the people or with the town was strictly as a consultant or an outside vendor, that would be a contractual relationship in which there's no fiduciary responsibility. But that isn't what characterizes your role. What characterizes your role is this level of trust that somebody has entrusted their assets in your hands. You're also a fiduciary for public contracting on behalf of the public access to facilities, for example. You're the fiduciary for public records and the maintenance of public records on behalf of the people of the town. You're certainly a fiduciary to assure the public safety, health, and welfare of the town of Los Gatos. There may be others. There may be other functions that you fulfill, but again, these are all fiduciary functions as distinguished from contractual functions. Whole list of duties that come along with this. The core duties of a fiduciary, the first and foremost duty is a duty of loyalty. It's a singleness of purpose, that your loyalty is to the people of the town of Los Gatos, and that means that your interests, your personal interests, must be subservient to the interests of the people who trust that you will act in their behalf. You have a duty of care and prudence. We'll talk about both of these a little bit more detail, but this is a very high standard, by the way, this duty of prudence. It's very nearly a prudent expert standard. And best way I could describe that is, it's not enough to have good intentions. When you sit on the council, when you sit as a trustee over the pension trust, for example, just feeling like you want to do good is insufficient to meet your standard of due care. You have a higher standard than that. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But being a prudent steward of other people's assets means more than just, this was one court said, it's not enough to have a good heart if you've got an empty head. You have to fill your head with care in how you go about the work of being a fiduciary. You have a duty to act in the public's best interests. Again, that's that duty of loyalty that requires you to put aside your own interests and the interests of other people and focus on the interests of the public at large. You have a strong duty of impartiality to treat all your constituents the same. Again, avoiding conflicts between conflicts of interest. You have a duty of accountability and transparency. We have plenty of laws that require that, but beyond the laws, beyond the Brown Act, for example, there is an obligation to make sure that your beneficiaries know what you are doing and hold you accountable. Certainly you have a duty to follow the law. There's plenty of laws on the books telling towns and cities how to govern themselves. There's the Brown Act. There's FPPC regulations. There's campaign finance laws. There's internal revenue laws that you have to follow, especially when you're stewarding pension assets. The 115 Trust is a good example. I don't know if anybody told you what 115 means, but it's a section of the Internal Revenue Code. Those monies, that the ability to set up a trust that way and have the contributions in the trust not taxable to the beneficiaries of that trust, which is what it's structured to be, requires approval by the Internal Revenue Service. And it's under Section 401 of the Internal Revenue Code. It's a governmental plan. And you have to establish that it is a creature of the government and it has a governmental purpose. And then there are things that you must do, and the Internal Revenue Code and regulations trigger all of these fiduciary responsibilities. If we were not exempt, if as a government plan, if we weren't exempt from ERISA, your 115 trust would be an ERISA trust and governed by all the ERISA requirements for pension and OPEB trusts that are imposed on private companies. Government plans are exempt from ERISA, but the standards, the fiduciary standards to qualify that plan, that 115 trust, as a non-taxable entity are all laid out in the Internal Revenue Code and in IRS regulations. And how you invest that money, for example, is also subject to IRS rules. So this duty to follow the law is a keen one, and again requires, through the duty of care and prudence, for you to familiarize yourself with all those things that will impact what you do with that money, where you can invest it. Can you invest it overseas, for example? Can you buy property with it? What can you do with that money? That's all going to be subject to IRS regulations, for example. Ultimately, I like to include this because we're at a time where people's trust in government seems to be challenged every day. And one of what I consider to be a fundamental fiduciary responsibility is to constantly act in a way that preserves the public's trust in their government. That carries well into the future and well beyond your own tenure as council members. A little bit more about this loyalty requirement. This is where the avoiding conflicts of interest really comes into play. You have a lot of interests on matters that come before you. You have to be able to identify what's generally in the public's interest and put aside not only your own personal interests, but those who come into your offices and lobby, for example, for pet projects or contracts and that sort of thing. You have to keep constantly coming back to the clear path that what you are doing has to be done for the public's good and not your own good and not others. In the municipal context, there are many times when you could be, a lot of people in local government sit on different panels and have different, like you sit on different committees, but some people will serve in different districts, for example. They'll serve on a sanitary district and maybe a park and rec district. Those can become incompatible offices. We have a very strong law in California, Section 1099 of the Government Code, that actually makes it unlawful to hold, by definition, incompatible offices. But there are offices which may not be technically incompatible, but which may put you in a conflict of which is more important. I'll give you see if we can give you an example. Suppose you had somebody who sat on a sanitary district and also sat on, like I said, a park and rec district. Now, classically, a parks and rec district would have to contract with the sanitary district for services in the parks. If you have somebody sitting on both of those boards, how does that person reconcile their interests and who they represent when they're negotiating the contract for sanitation services for the parks? It's not possible. They can't sit on both sides of that contract, and that's an essential contract. So in those circumstances, the law would say those are incompatible offices and you couldn't hold both of them. There are going to be other situations that come up when you'll be put, depending on what entities you sit on and what interests you have. And I'll come back to the 115 Trust, for example. There may be times when your interests as a trustee of the 115 Trust may differ from your interests as town council members. It's very possible. On the use of funds, on the investment of funds, on the cash flow requirements, on the impact on the general fund. It's something to be sensitive to, and something I think we could talk about in further detail, if not tonight at another time. But there may come a time when the interests of the town as plan sponsor, because it is a plan, and the interests of the trustees or decision of the trustees of the 115 Trust may differ. There may be different pressures on you. There may be different interests. In those situations, you have to deal with them. There are ways of dealing with conflicts. You may have been through that before, and the rule of necessity and that sort of thing. But I want to sensitize you to the possibility that when you're wearing your trustee hat, you must wear it first and foremost. You can't wear any other hats. And sometimes that could be very uncomfortable and awkward. And your constituents may not understand it. It may be hard enough for you to understand it, but it's hard to express it to your constituents. But that's what it means to be loyal. And when you have those fiduciary responsibilities imposed on you, or you assume those responsibilities, it comes with the territory that you may have to deal with conflicts of interest. It's a very strong public policy to avoid those kind of conflicts. Part of that is that when those things come up, the Brown Act, they said about the Brown Act, the best antiseptic is sunshine in government. The best antiseptic for conflicts of interest are disclosure and recusal. And there's another trust thing at work here, and some of the hypotheticals that I posed to you and we'll talk about raise this issue. Besides the public's trust in you, the reason why this is not, you're not just like the controller of New York who basically runs all the finances of New York. This is a 5-member council. It's constructed this way so you have a diverse number of views. You come from different backgrounds. You have different talents. The public wants to have a consensus being built and wants to have its town run by a group of 5, not just by a strong mayor, for example, or some other mechanism. Part of the fiduciary trust is the trust that you have in each other. And it's the trust that you have to maintain a level playing field. So this comes back to conflicts of interest. When it comes up that any one of you may be concerned about a potential conflict of interest, or an interest that you have, or an influence on you in making the decisions, I submit that you owe it to each other as co-fiduciaries to make disclosure of those things. Wouldn't you want to know as a council member if another council member's judgment was being influenced by an interest other than what was in the public's best interest? That's something that you owe to each other to make those kind of disclosures, and if necessary, to recuse yourself from making a decision. So that's another level of trust in a fiduciary relationship. When you're co-fiduciaries, your fiduciary relationship is horizontal, not just vertical to the public. It's horizontal among yourselves. And that's a critical aspect of a group acting as a fiduciary council, for example. The other thing I want to point out, and this surprises some people when I raise it, and that is abstentions. I don't know if you have an issue here or have had an issue in the past. I don't want to be touching any third rail, but a lot of people feel that it's safe to abstain from voting, either because they didn't prepare for that evening's meeting, materials came too late, they weren't present at the meeting, and so they don't feel they can approve the minutes. Any number of reasons. They know the person who's appearing before them because they live across the street from them or something, and they think that, or it's a tough decision and they don't want to be held accountable for it, and they say, well, I figure 3 people are going to vote for this, they don't need my vote, so I think I'll abstain. What an abstention does, in my view, is it breaches the loyalty test. It strains the loyalty test because the public has put 5 people, I'll use this as an example, 5 people on the council, not 7, not 4, and it expects that you will do your job. And the public needs you to do your job. When you abstain, you upset the balance that's been crafted, and you have to give the public credit for trying to balance this council, for example, or any board, with the way it's composed. And if you abstain from voting when it's not absolutely necessary or called for, you're upsetting that balance that the public has entrusted on the board with. and you're not carrying out your responsibility as a public official, because you're here to act, not act. All of the laws on the books say the board shall, the council shall. Everyone has a mandatory language in it. Well, when you abstain, you're not doing your job. Now, there are completely good reasons to abstain from voting, but I submit to you that it's not consistent with your duty of loyalty to your office and to the public for you to abstain for reasons like, I don't want to be seen to be voting for this. It's okay if it goes through. It'll go through without my vote, or something like that. It's one thing if there are good reasons to abstain and recuse yourself for personal interest, for example. But otherwise, I would urge that when the tendency is to find the easy way out of a vote, don't take the easy way out. Also, in loyalty, this is really tough. You have to be loyal to the public, but what does that mean? You've seen, I haven't watched your videos, but I'm sure that in hotly contested issues that come before you, get a lot of people on all sorts. They're all members of the public. They're all citizens of the town of Los Gatos, residents, and they come in and they're all over the map. And your job is to figure out what is in the public's best interest. And how do you do that? Well, fortunately, you're given broad discretion to make a judgment call. That's part of being a fiduciary. That I think it might have been the third bullet point on the first or second slide after all the old dead white guys. It's the idea that they're going to trust your judgment. People have to trust your judgment. So you're given broad latitude, but ultimately you've got to decide what is in the public's best interest. And I'll make another horizontal vertical analogy with my hands here, because it's horizontal to the extent that you have to figure out what's fair and reasonable among people across a broad spectrum. And then you have to decide what's fair and reasonable across the years from now going forward. This is the proverbial don't kick the can down the road. Don't save a few dollars today for political reasons if you're going to saddle a future generation of residents with the cost. That's the kind of balance that you've got to strike. This is tough. This is not an easy thing to do. And that's why the nice thing here is that you can do it collectively. It's not just one person's judgment being relied upon. It's all your judgments collectively. So when those decisions have to be made, you need to decide what is in the best interest of the public generally. And fortunately, when people question your judgment, if you can show that you balance those interests, the courts would uphold you, the exercise of your judgment. We have a case pending now in a county in the Central Valley that's been up and down to the Court of Appeals twice, and it's been 9 years since the case, and we're back in the trial court again. And it all has to do with a pension board's exercise of judgment in the deepest heart of the Great Recession, 2009 and 10, making a judgment about balancing contribution rates into the pension fund with employees' jobs and breaking the county's budget, and what do we do, and weighing those things in the balance. And ultimately, I don't think there's any doubt that will prevail on behalf of the board, but it's been a tortuous journey. And the law basically says that if you had a good process as fiduciaries when you went through it, we're going to uphold the exercise of your judgment. You can imagine if the law were other than that. If courts could second guess years later, in hindsight, well, that wasn't a very good decision that you made. You wouldn't be sitting. I mean, it would be very hard to get people to sit on councils if that were the case. And finally, I want to just dwell a little bit on what it means to be prudent. The prudence standard, and this comes right out of trust law for all fiduciaries. It's in the Constitution of the state of California, actually, for pension fiduciaries. It's an interesting standard. It says that you have a duty to act under the circumstances then prevailing, as would a prudent person in a like capacity and familiar with these matters, in the conduct of an enterprise of like character and with like aims. So what does that all mean? I'm trying to unpack that a little bit. It's an objective test. This is a test of whether you acted prudently and with due care. That's not based upon whether you had good intentions, but measuring you against some hypothetical fiduciary who serves in a similar capacity that you do, who would have all the information that you would have or should have in making the decision, whose goals are the same as yours, and are in charge of a town like Los Gatos. How do you prove that? But that's the idea, that there's supposed to be an objective standard to measure what you do, not a subjective standard. The phrase "under the circumstances then prevailing" is the thing that saves you from people second guessing you years later. You make decisions as they're presented to you, under the circumstances that they're presented to you, with the budgets that you have, with the public interest that you have, with the resources that you have. That's when you'll be measured. What judgment did you exercise under those circumstances, not under some hypothetical set of circumstances? But the other thing, and I'll click down about 4 bullet points there, it also means that you can't just make a decision, set it, and forget it. That a good fiduciary constantly revisits their decisions because circumstances change. And as circumstances change, you have to, I don't know if anyone's a sailor, I'm not a sailor, but there's a phrase, trim your sails. You have to react to the weather conditions at the time, the fiscal conditions, the weather, whatever the conditions are. This is very important, as you'll see when we talk about the pension and OPEB trust. You're building a trust of assets that eventually are going to be significant enough to invest in something other than overnight paper. I don't know what the size of the OPEB trust is yet at this point, but at some point you're going to be making investment decisions relating to those assets. And you're going to make those decisions not in a vacuum, but if this were to happen today, for example, you're going to make a decision about investing them in equity or debt in a market that is, by all accounts, ridiculously frothy. And you're going to have to make decisions. Do we roll it into the S&P 500? Do we put it into some global equities? Do we put it in the bond market? Do we put it in foreign bonds? What do we do with this money? And the ground will constantly change on you. You can't just set it and forget it. You know this probably from your own personal stewardship of your own family assets, that you can't just let it ride on the table. So as a good fiduciary, you've got to constantly revisit the prevailing circumstances and say, where were we? Remember 6 months ago we decided to do this? Did that ever happen? We thought that something was going to happen in the market and it didn't. Arn knows a lot of people went into commodities thinking that that was a great play, and it turned out to be a terrible play. Those things you have to keep changing depending on changing circumstances. You also, as part of being prudent, you have to delegate to others if you don't have the expertise yourself. It's critical because you're going to be held to a higher standard than just good intentions. So if there's something you don't understand, and I will suggest to you that investing in today's markets requires a level of expertise that even the experts don't have, but you have to come as close to it as you can possibly get, that you have to delegate responsibilities sometimes to people, to consultants, to staff who have the expertise and can educate you on those things. And then finally, a word about process. I've done not a technical survey, but an informal survey of pension fiduciary cases that have come down over the last dozen years or so, to see practically what happens when fiduciaries are sued for breach of fiduciary duty. What are the outcomes of those cases? Because I'm asked all the time by my clients, what's the worst that could happen if we make this decision in a certain way? So I went back and I looked at just a raft of cases, government pension cases, ERISA pension cases, appellate cases, and uniformly, if the fiduciaries can show to a court that they went through a prudent, there's that word again, process, and they weighed the facts, and they took into account all the pluses and minuses of decisions that they were making, that it didn't matter if General Motors stock dropped while they were going all in on it, for example. It didn't matter what the outcome of the decision was in terms of whether they honored their fiduciary duty. It mattered if they had a good process for making a decision. And so if you assure yourselves that the process you make decisions is a sound one, record it. I take it all the meetings are recorded here, all the public meetings and the deliberations, and the materials are agenda backup and are available publicly. This is a terrific assurance. Forget about fiduciary insurance. Your best fiduciary insurance is a demonstrable record of prudent judgment based upon sound information that's presented to you. And if you can establish that, you've gone as far as you possibly can to establish that you've acted as a prudent fiduciary. And I'm pretty certain that you do that. But again, it'll come up. And keep in mind, these are like little things. I'm planning these little contact capsules for you, maybe. During meetings, if you're making an important decision, make sure the record includes everything that you're basing your decision on. Make sure that if staff has done a report, that it's part of the backup, that you ask for, say, make sure that's in the minutes, because that's the record a long time later. When people start to second guess your decision, that's when you want to pull out and say, see, this was done publicly. We had members of the unions, or we had members of management, or whatever. We had vendors here. We made a decision based upon all the available information. It's all part of the record. That's your best insurance policy. Any questions? Anything you want to talk about at this point? That wasn't water, was it?
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. I have two questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. If liability is found, if the liability is found as against the fiduciary body, who is liable? Is it the town? Is it the individual? Where does liability lie?
So fortunately for you as individuals, The government code of California provides local public officials with indemnification for and coverage of costs for actions taken in the course and scope of your responsibilities. Now, if you do something that's outside the course and scope of your responsibilities, if you duke out your neighbor on the council dais, for example, or engage in other kind of personal torts, sexual harassment, for example, would not be covered. But for decisions that you make in the ordinary course of being a council member, the city owes you an obligation to defend and hold you harmless in that situation.
All right, and one of the other questions that came up, you were talking about fiduciary, and you mentioned you can get the information you need. What if the body is deliberating and I don't have the information I need to make my decision? Maybe they all do, but I don't. What do I do?
Well, you really need to get it. You need to get it. It's an obligation to get the information you need, that in your judgment that you need to make a sound decision.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and ask a question. So you talked about we shouldn't be abstaining because the public has trusted us to be involved in making a decision. Another place is recusal. There's a lot of, there's clear laws on, if you have a financial gain on potentially on it, you should recuse. But there's a lot of gray area in there where technically you don't need to recuse yourself, but the perception is bad and you should recuse yourself. Now you're starting to get into this tug and pull of, well, it's my duty to be up here making decisions. On the other hand, I don't want to give bad impressions either. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's why you get paid the big bucks.
Okay.
So, it is difficult, and perception is important. Remember, I included that bullet point that said one of your obligations is to help cement the public's trust in their government. Recusal in situations where it's not absolutely required is a judgment call, and it's important if you believe that, in all honesty, you can't exercise impartial judgment. More importantly, I think, and this goes back to the disclosure part, while you want to err on the side of not looking like you're biased, if you explain the influence that you're worried about, that you're concerned about, that gives rise to your concern about being impartial or not, if you explain that publicly to people and say, on balance, while I recognize that I've met this person who comes before us with a permit request or something like that, I know this person from the sidelines of the soccer field of my kids' games, and we've been friendly. If you'll say that publicly and say, so I'm wrestling with something here, and I want you to know how I'm going to come out. I know this person. Here's how I know this person. I will say that I think I can vote on this impartially and without any color there, but I want you to know that it's something I'm thinking about. And I've made a decision that under the circumstances that it's not going to color my ability to be impartial and to exercise my responsibilities, and so therefore I'm voting on this matter. That goes a long way to assuring the public that you're thoughtful and you've considered those things. While it still gives you the opportunity to come down on the side of, you know what, I think I'm okay. But it's something each one of you have to exercise for yourself. It's not something that can be dictated. And you really have to make those judgment calls on your own. And you could come down on, 51-49 on some of those things like that. If you're going to come down one way or the other, it's terrific to explain why. Take a moment. Doesn't extend the meeting too long. Let the public know that you're exercising thoughtful judgment. It's an amazing how that changes the atmosphere in a room, in a public room, when they see people honestly grappling with those issues and making a decision. It really does create a respectful atmosphere. I've seen it many times, and it's always impressive to see somebody take that position instead of simply saying, I'm not comfortable voting on this, I'm not going to vote.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Sayak?
You mentioned ERISA.
Yes.
Could you explain what that is?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's one of these inside baseball things. ERISA is the Employees Retirement Income Security Act, right? Income Security Act, that's it. Okay, it's the federal law that governs corporate pension funds, private pension funds, and people who run money for private pension funds, 401ks, that sort of thing, ERISA. It's a federal act that establishes all of the fiduciary responsibilities and legal responsibilities of trustees, for example, of pension plans. But that's on the private side, like a 401k, even some Taft-Hartley plans, labor plans, but not in the government, because the government's, it's all part of the federal Constitution and states' rights. We are exempt from federal regulation because we're essentially an arm of the state of California, and they resolved under that ERISA law that state and local governments would be exempt from those laws. But our laws in California mirror those laws on fiduciary responsibilities almost verbatim. So that's ERISA. I never do remember the I. Income, there's this income in there. You'd think that would be one I would remember. What I would like to do, Mr. Mayor, Arn's got a question.
I actually do have a question. One of the deliberative bodies that helps channel information to this newly formed committee is our Finance Committee. Our Finance Committee is constructed of 5 members. 2 are council members who are the voting members on the committee. And then we also have 3 public members who come with a certain amount of institutional expertise that also help in the deliberative process. The public members as non-voting members, would you characterize them as fiduciaries, or would you only characterize the voting members of the 2 council members as fiduciaries in that deliberative process?
Help me understand the role of the Finance Committee vis-a-vis this committee.
So the Finance Committee is the body that the town council first originated to help vet and understand issues, but predominantly it was pension issues at the time. And so the Finance Committee was brought into existence through ordinance. And then later it was decided that having resident input would probably be very beneficial to the deliberative process. And so 3 residents who come with some type of financial institutional background sit on that committee and help with the deliberations. Now, that being said, if there's ever going to be a motion taken to forward something to the town council, the only 2 voting members are the 2 council members who are represented on that Finance Committee. And so my question is, from a fiduciary standpoint, my guess would be it's really those 2 voting members who in their fiduciary capacity who are passing information on to this body or to the town council kind of fall under this fiduciary role. I'm curious, do our public members fall under a fiduciary role, or are they really just advisors in their capacity?
Yes.
I think another key point is that the Finance Committee can't actually make any decision. Everything is passed to the council for decision.
Or this body, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I may not know enough about it, but this may trigger something where you'll know enough about it to say one way or the other, and that is this. There are, under the Political Reform Act of conflicts of interest and disclosures, that sort of thing, there are obligations imposed on people who, quote, manage public investments. And it's not just the ones who have the ultimate responsibility to make the decisions, but it also extends to those who participate in making the decisions. So to the extent a subordinate body or a affiliate body like a finance committee or something, to the extent that members of that committee are participating in the making of decisions relating to managing public investments, the investment of public money, they would be subject to all of the conflict of interest laws and requirements, and I would say fiduciary responsibilities, if that's what they're doing. And this has been extended to recommending bodies as well as the bodies who make the decision. So, for example, I'm giving an example back to the pension fund in San Jose. Myself and investment consultants who participate in advising the board of retirement in asset allocation and investing assets, we are all Form 700 filers. And we're Form 700 filers because the FPPC regulations require us, treat us as if we were public officials. We're the equivalent of public officials if we're participating in that process and we're doing things that otherwise staff would have to do. So I don't know enough about the Finance Committee, but I would say that to the extent any members of the Finance Committee and the public members of the Finance Committee are making or influencing, participating in decisions about the investment of the assets, that they would be fiduciaries and subject to the requirements of conflict of interest and disclosure laws.
Thank you. One of the reasons I ask is because of my familiarity with pensions as staff, you touched on it in your presentation. I knew for, my town council and my governing body, I needed to create process. And so that's where the recommendation to create this committee was. That's where the recommendation to create the investment policy was, the recommendation to have fiduciary training, because I know how important it is to document process. So part of the reason I asked is if I should have our public members on the Finance Committee watch a replay of this meeting, so in essence, I can say they've had fiduciary training as part of the process of their participation on the Finance Committee. Sure.
Councilmember Spector.
Oh, I was looking at them. I'll look at you. Let me follow up on that, because I had a feeling you were going to say they had a fiduciary participation. Putting that aside, you had answered one of my questions about, is there fiduciary protection for the council members? Is there also that kind of governmental fiduciary protection for the lay members of the Finance Committee?
Well, that's an interesting question. It comes down to interpreting what the word employee means in the indemnity provisions of the government code, because the government code is written, and it was written some time ago, it's under the Tort Claims Act, but it's written so it says if the agency owes an obligation to indemnify an employee. So then the question is, what's an employee? Well, it's already been decided that a council member or a board member of a pension board or a trustee of a pension board is considered to be an employee, even though they're not technically, they don't get a W-2 from the town, but you're still an employee. I don't know if it's been extended to lay participants. I would think it would be, because even though they are not W-2 employees of the employer, they are rendering service. Do they get paid at all? They do not. They don't get paid. It's going to depend on whether they're seen to be as independent contractors or consultants, for example, who are not indemnified, or wear the trappings of being employees. I would think that to the extent that they're designated to be a participant of the committee, even as a non-voting participant, as opposed distinguished from a consultant to the committee. If they're a member of the committee, I think it quacks a lot more like an employee. But I can't give you definitively on that.
Thank you.
If I were one of them, however, I'd get an umbrella policy on my homeowners.
Thank you.
I think you actually know one of our members, Ashby Monk.
Oh, is Ashby one of your members? Okay. Congratulations.
Yeah, great. Great committee member.
Interesting.
And he needs an umbrella.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend he get an umbrella. He probably already has one, but because an indemnity is only worth the paper it's written on until you actually get indemnified. So, and there's a lot that can happen between the time something gets triggered and not. That's another. Fiduciary insurance is a whole nother topic. Now, depending on your interest, as you know, I gave you ahead of time some hypothetical scenarios. I'd love to spend a little time with you talking through them, but the time is late. I know this is an unusual meeting, so I'm at your disposal if you'd like to talk through some of these things, and I'd love to do it with you. So, up to you.
What's the pleasure of the council?
You won't hurt my feelings. So.
I'm
Councilmember
fine,
Stecker?
but I will defer to the rest of you.
Let's talk through some of them, I think.
All right. Yeah, well, it might be helpful. Let me. Somebody said they had a handheld. No, that's a clicker.
You can take this one.
That's a clicker. Where is it? I'm sorry.
The mayor has it.
Oh. All right. Thanks. We're on? Okay. This will be easier if I do this. Let's take the first one, because I'm really curious to see how you come across it. I will say that in all these scenarios, they are very closely, the movies they talk about, based on a true story. These are all based on true stories. A few things have been changed, but here's our first scenario. Councilmember Charlie has a gemology degree. I don't even know what a gemology degree. I had to change the facts. Is there a degree in gemology? But so he has a gemology degree. He's interested in gems. When he attends League of Cities and other conferences, he likes to host late-night sales auctions in his hotel room, where he auctions off various gems and jewelry to the highest bidders. Well, you know who shows up at these late-night meetings mostly. It's the winning bidders always seem to be the marketing staff of public works vendors attending the conference, because they can afford the price of his fancy jewels. So earlier on the day of one late night auction that Charlie was conducting, the firm of one of the successful auction bidders, so the bidder was working for this firm, responded to an open RFP issued by the council for construction of a public parking facility. Mr. Mayor, you see any issues here?
Yes, I do. It sounds like a conflict of interest to me.
Run me through the conflict.
Well, if they've responded to an RFP, if the council votes on the RFP, which they usually do, and he's doing significant business with this company, he should be recusing himself from that decision. So by doing this, he's almost violating his fiduciary duty, because he's kind of putting himself in a recusal position.
Now, he doesn't know who's going to be bidding on these things, right?
Well, you said earlier in the day they responded, so now he does know who's bidding on it.
So, okay, so you're assuming that he knew who filed bids. So this is important because it does go to a state of mind. I mean, suppose he had no idea, because, you know, he's at the League of Cities conference in Glendale or something like that, and, you know, back here at the shop, an RFP response comes in from somebody, and now he's got a room full of people with money in their pocket bidding on his. He doesn't know that this person is affiliated with one of the bidders. Or should he know? Would it matter that they're a specific bidder, or just somebody who might do business with the city, the town?
Well, my opinion is he has a right to make a living and have a business. So if that's the case, then it's probably okay for him to be selling his jewels. But when it certainly comes to him voting for the RFP, it at least has the image of a conflict of interest, if not a real one.
Council member, is Charlie personally profiting?
Well, so my immediate thought was he's there on town business. His conference room, his hotel room's paid for by the town. So he shouldn't be profiting and making money for his business while on town property. That's me. I wasn't even thinking of the RFP. I'm thinking immediately of just, why is he doing this?
So you don't like that he's conducting this auction and selling his wares at a conference that's been paid for by the town?
Correct. Specifically in the room that's paid for by the town. I mean, we're in a lot of our training, we're told not to use town equipment for personal business, and yet he's using a room paid for by the town.
Yes, ma'am.
You have, I think, and thank you both for teeing this up, you have raised several fiduciary issues. You've raised the fiduciary, Charlie is, in my mind, is a fiduciary to the council and to the town or city.
Okay.
And so he's using, as she said, the city-paid room to run his business and to make money. So that is not consistent with being a fiduciary to the city. The other thing he's doing and might be doing is he's not a fiduciary to the city if he is voting on an RFP that came from his money-making venture. Now, what you said is he doesn't know what the RFP is, but I do see fiduciary issues all the way through this.
All the way through. Would it matter to you if he knew this person or didn't know the person? Would that make any difference, that he knew that this person who was bidding on his gems was affiliated with the vendor?
If he knew, that would just raise the heat on the fiduciary issue.
What would you expect? Let me ask our vice mayor, what would you expect at the meeting? Would you want to know if your colleague was in this situation? Or would it be okay with you if he didn't bother to mention this?
My first impression is absolutely I would like to know that there was a council member doing this who sat on a council with myself and other council members. I think it's quite frankly just odd behavior. You know, when you think of common sense, why is this guy doing this, you know, at a League of Cities conference? You know, he's trying to build his business, he's trying to build opportunity for his personal life. And as Councilmember Sayak said, he's on the company dime. He's supposed to be representing the city, not representing his own personal
Even
interests.
after hours.
Even after hours.
Even in his own hotel room.
Even in his own hotel room, because it's who he is representing, or who he is approaching. He has people who are members of other agencies or other public works departments coming to buy things from him, essentially. And that creates a conflict of interest. So, in my opinion, it just smells bad. Lots of things could be.
Sometimes it's really difficult to get across, not here, difficult to get across the idea that when you are a public official entrusted with the public's trust, that there are things that you think you can do personally that can be cabined and say, well, that's my personal life, and this is my council life. And it's not really so. It's a burden on people to become public officials and fiduciaries. It does color you. It necessarily colors your personal life. You can't, I mean, you're all quite certain, and I agree with you, even if it just comes down to the best sense, which is the common sense, that there's something rotten about this. There's something just wrong for someone who's a public official to personally gain in a circumstance like this. But this is a real situation. This has come up at a conference. Weren't selling gems, but these kind of things go on all the time. And I love the color that you put on this by saying, who paid for it? What's he doing there? Whose business is he on? Whose room is it? The public paid for the venue in this situation, and it does raise all kinds of fiduciary issues. So, well analyzed. I left the clicker. Let's try another one. Local real estate syndicator has just been elected to the council. Belongs to a men's club, private men's club. I don't know, do they still exist? I don't even know. Men's club is throwing a private, invitation-only dinner reception. They're quite proud of their member for the new council member, and it will feature his official swearing-in ceremony. You were all sworn in, right? Okay, city clerk, county clerk. Forgive me if I say city instead of town, but clerk swore you in. Well, the clerk's going to show up at the men's club and conduct the official swearing-in ceremony. The club invites the 3 other men on the 5-person council to attend because it will be a good networking opportunity for them. Our town manager is perplexed. Town manager doesn't know, is it okay for the council members to go? Is it okay for the men only to go? Is the value of the dinner a gift to each of them? Can the town instead accept the gift and designate people to go? Should the town just write a check for the cost of the dinner? What do you think? Who wants to start this one? Yes, sir.
So first and foremost, our town manager would absolutely know that this is a Brown Act violation.
In what way?
You have an unnoticed meeting with 4 of 5 council members.
Ah, but it's social, right? It's a social meeting. There's no business going to be discussed of the council. Uh-oh, you don't think so?
You said they were being sworn in, and you said the clerk was there.
So that just made it a meeting?
It made it formal.
Ah, interesting take. Was that your approach too? That this is an official meeting of a majority of the board because the clerk's there conducting an official swearing in?
That is correct. In addition, the town manager has been notified, so they are aware of what's going on.
But we
that
can't do
adds
it.
another level.
Okay, That's a great catch. So let's take the clerk out. Not going to have the swearing in. They just want to have fun. They want to congratulate their member on becoming elected to the town council. Private men's club. What does the town manager think about this? What would you like to do with this, other than wish that they never came up?
Yeah, I would advise that they not participate in.
That they know. Why?
Well, there's a lot of issues going on. I think, first of all, as a woman, I have to say, you know, what is the perception to our community if they were to agree to participate in a men's club? I think that's part of a fiduciary element that we need to be sensitive to.
You don't want to see it above the fold in the Merc the next morning?
Well, that's always the test, right? Would you like to see that headline?
Well, that's a pretty dang good test, don't you think? I mean,
Yes.
that actually is a pretty good test.
And then, of course, the conflict of interest rules, the FPPC. In our AB 1234 training, we've been taught that there is a maximum amount of a gift that we can even accept for reporting purposes. And so, you know, I think many public officials just stay away from gifts, period, because they don't want to report it or.
Do you have a no gifts policy in this town?
We have a disclosure, so
Disclosure.
that we do have a gift policy.
What about this being a great networking opportunity for some of these people? Are you comfortable with that? What do you think?
It's a great opportunity for men, no? And I have a serious problem with just that concept right there.
Would you be more comfortable if let's see, we got 5, the 2 women on the council also were invited? They'd
The men's club.
To the men's club. Well, they have an outdoor veranda that's,
You lost me at the men's club. I just stopped listening.
Okay. Well, suppose I'm going to take the men's club part of it out then. It's just a club. And it's a great networking opportunity. And you were invited. How about that?
So I'm a big believer, and we talk a lot in this council of public events, like a swearing. That's a public ceremony, and those should always be available in a public venue for the entire community in the town to participate in. And an official swearing in should not be limited to those who can afford a private club.
Uh-oh. We got a question here.
The problematic line is the one that says a good networking opportunity for them.
Uh-huh.
Because you have council members who are being invited under the guise of potentially a swearing in, but if we eliminate that fact,
Yeah.
council members that are being invited to a real estate syndicator party with the expectation that there's going to be some business opportunity or interest as well, perhaps in exchange for favors, voting favors.
So you raised 2 things there. One is the networking opportunity could be because the real estate community wants the opportunity to reach out and touch people who may be voting on things that they're interested in, right?
That is correct.
Or that it's a networking opportunity for the personal benefit of the council members.
That is also correct.
You got them both.
Under the guise of a city event
A city
or
event.
perceived city business, in addition to the Brown Act violation and the men's club. And we have a majority of women on our council.
Well, this was a hypothetical.
Thank goodness.
Well, good. There's a high ethical standard being set here in this town. I'm very pleased to see it. Yeah. Let's do our last scenario, okay? If you bear with me, let's try one more. Council member Selma uses medical marijuana to help her sleep at night. She's become friends with the owner of a dispensary in the nearby city, who is interested in expanding into Selma's town. Now, the council is considering a general prohibition on all marijuana dispensaries within the town limits, but Selma has pledged to her friend that she would vote against the measure. Her friend, out of personal gratitude to her friend Selma, has promised Selma a contribution to her upcoming campaign. I see frowns. The mayor gets this one kicked off.
Well, so the very first problem is we aren't supposed to prejudge how we're going to vote on something until we've heard all the evidence. So that's a big problem right there. That
Duty of prudence and care, sounds like to me.
yes, she should never have promised before hearing all the evidence how she's going to vote.
But she cares about this personally. Can't she bring that
Well,
into the council chambers?
Yes, she can, but she can't promise how she's going to vote.
So you're worried about the promise, the pledge to her friend that she would vote against the measure.
Yeah, she can't pledge. I mean, she can certainly say, well, I tend to favor against this, but, until I hear all the evidence, I'm not sure how I'm going to vote. That's what she needs to say.
And where should she get all that evidence? I mean, she's been going to dispensaries for medical marijuana for a long time. She knows they're nice, clean places. She knows who goes there. She knows they run a good business.
But
It's not all paid with Bitcoin.
that's only part of the evidence. Our job is to listen to the public and collect evidence from the public, collect evidence from the staff meetings, collect evidence from emails that are sent to us, listen during our council meetings. We shouldn't come to a council meeting knowing how we're going to vote already.
Okay. What about the campaign contribution here? Isn't that part of free speech? What do you think, Councilmember Spector?
No,
No?
no. This is bias and breach of fiduciary duty.
How
The whole
so?
thing. Well, first of all, as he said, she has promised a vote to someone with whom she has a relationship, and now her friend is going to give her money for her reelection campaign. Actually, there's nothing in your hypothetical here that's good.
Wasn't supposed to be. It's supposed to be really bad. Well, now wait a minute. Okay, seriously here. Can't someone out of gratitude, are you seeing this as a quid pro quo? You think this was a promise? But she was already disposed to vote for it. She didn't say, promises, I'm thinking of voting against keeping the government open tonight. What are you going to promise me? Well, I'll contribute to your campaign. Okay, I'll change my vote.
You have her friend out of personal gratitude.
Yeah, there
which
you
refers
go.
back to the prior paragraph, has promised Selma a contribution.
Ah.
This is like law school.
Is
Except
it that painful?
No, except hypos are supposed to be tighter than this. This
Yeah,
is
I
like
know.
obvious.
Yeah, well, this is so I'll bring it back some tighter ones. I had to take the real ones. Yeah, okay, so you see a real quid pro quo here. Everybody does, huh? Say that there was a promise here, even though she was disposed to vote for that way anyway. Any other issues you see here? What you don't see in these hypotheticals is what happens when the vote comes. This is something we touched on a little bit, which is, what is she going to disclose to her colleagues? What is she going to say when she's on the dais and the matter comes up for a vote? Is she going to say, oh, by the way, I've been using medical marijuana for years, and I think it's a great thing? Or is she going to say, I promised my friend who wants to open up in our town.
I think you're saying, what will she do when she's up here and she doesn't want to like totally embarrass herself?
Right.
She says that the person who is applying is her friend, and so she's going to recuse herself.
Oh, she's going to recuse herself?
Well, yes. Is that her friend?
But she won't get her
who's
campaign contribution. You won't get the quid pro quo unless she votes.
It's okay. But she's going to be a good person.
She'll be a good person. Okay. Yeah, disclosure's a big thing. But it would be, clearly it would be embarrassing, but among yourselves, you would want to know if this promise had been made. Think about what you would feel like to learn after a vote that your colleague had made a promise or had a personal interest in something that was not disclosed. That would be such a breach of trust among yourselves. And that's, I'm going to go back to the common sense comment. There's some things you just have to use good common sense with. But the newspaper test, the headline test, is one. I'm going to leave you just with the really key point to me is the test among yourselves. What are your expectations as co-fiduciaries, how you will behave with yourself and behave out there in the public? That will keep you grounded, I think, as much as anything, as much as the headline test. What do you want from each other? And what standard do you want to hold each other to? So thanks for giving me the opportunity to come spend a little time with you. It was fun for me. It might have been really obvious, but but not all of them. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity and thank you, and happy to answer any questions. And if you had anything specific about the 115 Trust, I'm happy to talk about that too.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the reason I asked about you need more information to make a decision. The 115 Trust, and we're the trustees. Is that what it is? Yeah. We're trustees to a paradigm that can be very complex. And making the decisions can be very complex. And so it seems to me that now here's the question. Do these fiduciaries just say, okay, we have a consultant and the consultant has said this is good and staff has said this is good, so even though we don't know that it's good, should we just accept what's told to us and then go forward with our vote?
Remember that bumper sticker from college days that said question authority? You really do have an obligation to question the people you're trusting, not just to accept blindly. And it's tough, you're right, it's a complex area. This shepherding other people's money is difficult, and it's difficult in the markets and how much money and the cash flow that's needed, and it requires some fundamental skills that you need to educate yourself with. You can do it. I have no doubt that you're capable of doing it. It's just that you have to devote some time that's a little bit different than the time that you would for some of the other committees that you might serve on. It's a higher responsibility. And you really can't just say, well, we've got an investment consultant, we're done. So it would be important to bring the consultant in on a periodic basis. Ask, again, let's go back to common sense. Why did you put all the money in General Motors? Why did you put all the money in commodities? Why did you do that? Why didn't you do this? What should we do going forward? What do you see are our needs? What's going to be in the best interest of the people? Tough. It's a tough thing to do, but it's going to be a different standard than you're going to have for being a council member.
And I'll just add, from a staff perspective, part of the process we're trying to build for you included the investment policy, and in there we already are trying to cover concepts of don't set it and forget it. Annually, at a minimum, you will review the asset allocation. Even if you maintain the same asset allocation, you'll have a conversation about it. And the expectation is Highmark Capital, who we in theory have delegated the investment part to through their 5 different asset allocations. We'll have them come in probably a minimum of every 6 months just to talk about what's happening within the asset allocation we've chosen. And so part of our job as staff, as Harvey has said, just from a fiduciary standpoint, is making sure that we create a well-documented process to provide opportunities to deliberate and make, the best prudent decision you can make with the information you have.
Go ahead.
Thank you. In your experience, are council members, council bodies, the oversight committee?
Not usually. Not usually. Usually it's a separate body of trustees or a trust administration.
Are they separate bodies with more financial or financially analytical background?
That's not really the point. I think the point is what I raised earlier, which is there's a tension between the interests of the plan sponsor, if you will, the town in this case, that's putting the money in, and the trust stewardship of what to do with the money, how to invest it, and what the goals of the trust are. And that tension generally is resolved by having the trustees be independent of the plan sponsor. It can be done, but it puts, it gives you 2 hats in some situations where it's difficult to separate. So part of that really comes down, and I haven't seen it, is the design of the trust and the clarity of the goals of what is this for? How has it been established? So the 115 trust is going to be used to, I take it as kind of a feeder fund, if you will, or a sinking fund or some kind of a backstop fund to the delivery and the cost of benefits through both the pension and OPEB that's given by in some other vehicle, right? In CalPERS, for example. I mean, is that how it works? And it's going to be used. Most 115 trusts are like this. They're used to feed into the vehicle that's going to deliver the benefits. So the question is, what is the design of the trust at the start by the plan sponsor, by the town? What is our goal? Are we going to fund it annually in a certain amount? Are we going to fund it only when we reach a certain level in the general fund and we have excess funds, or what we define as excess funds? Are we going to impose a separate surcharge on some service that will fund the 115? These would all tell you, the more automatic the funding mechanism is, the less potential conflict there would be between your role as the funder and the trust. But the more discretionary it is in putting money into it whenever you want, that could come and make it more difficult to accomplish the goals of the trust. So I know I'm talking in generalities here, but I would want to start and look at what is the goal of this, what is the purpose of the trust, what is the goal, what are the funding mechanisms that are going to be used, how much discretion will there be over the funding of the trust? And then what is the trust going to be earmarked for and used? Are there automatic triggers? if something happens in the market, or if our contributions to PERS go up a certain percentage, for example, does that automatically tap the trust? How much judgment call is going to be worked in on both sides of this thing? That would be important to know.
That was very helpful, and I'm glad that this is being taped.
And I would just add, a lot of what council just spoke to is still being deliberated at the Finance Committee in terms of there are going to be triggers, how are the monies eventually going to be used for one purpose or another. And during the discussion at the creation of this committee, I believe I mentioned I would not be surprised if a year or so from now this committee takes on a different composition. But the initial concern was there was nobody assuming the fiduciary responsibility for the assets that we had already started accumulating. The trust documents, and my expectation is internally we'll work more with Harvey and our own counsel on some of these items to put in a little more procedure and process. But I wouldn't be surprised if a year or so from now the decision is to evolve the committee to include, perhaps it's members from the public, similar to the way the Finance Committee is. San Jose went through several evolutions. Originally it was populated with mostly council members and then some employee representatives. They then moved to a construct where they did bring on a majority of outside public members. And so it's not uncommon to see the composition of a governing structure evolve, and I would probably expect the same for this.
Councilmember Sayak, did you have something?
Actually, Mr. Andrews answered a lot of those questions because as you were talking, I was thinking to myself and questioning whether we had had those discussions. Because I know as a council person, whenever budget discussion comes up, we have the range of opinions. We have some residents who feel every single penny should go into this new trust. And which hat am I wearing, right? Because if I'm a fiduciary, then you would assume you would want every single penny to continue it, to have it grow. But as a council member, you have other needs that you need to make sure you have funds for. So I'm looking forward to that discussion whenever it is going to
Might
take
be
place.
happy also to keep in mind, might be happy, huh? What is this? I'm thinking happy hour. Might be helpful to keep in mind that the sponsor, the town, is the policy-making body, and the trustees of the trust are essentially ministerial, carrying out the instructions of the trust. And so not setting the policy over the funding of the trust, that's a council role. But once that's in place and documented in the trust document, then the administration of that falls on the trustees of that trust to carry out those instructions. So you need to give clear instructions. It's almost like in a real estate context, there's the buyer and seller, the principals. They give the escrow holder instructions. The escrow holder has to follow the instructions of the principles of the transaction. It's the same kind of thing here. The town is the principal and creates the transaction, and the trustees are essentially the escrow holders who carry out the instructions. So if that helps divide up in your mind what the roles are. The importance, though, is that, as any escrow holder will tell you, the instructions have to be clear. They can't just throw their hands up and say, I don't know how to close this transaction because you didn't give me clear instructions. So that's the critical part.
Okay, seeing no further questions, are we ready to close this item? All right, so then we're adjourned.